Benefit risk evaluation of medical devices is one of the most challenging exercises in risk management because there is no cookie cutter formula. There is no mathematical equation that you can use, and a lot of judgment is involved. But it is something that we must do. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another special episode of the Let's Talk Risk podcast. I'm your host, Naveen Agarwal, and today I'm really excited to welcome my guest, Allison Komiyama. Before I tell you more about Allison, let me just say that she is someone I've been dying to talk to for a very long time. And I'm so glad that finally we're able to sit down and have this conversation. Now, Allison is a highly accomplished professional in the regulatory space. Again, we'll talk more about her professional journey, what she's doing right now. But more than anything else, what I love about Allison is the way she talks about complex topics in a fun and interesting way. If you're not following Allison, go check out her LinkedIn profile and some of the short videos she has been posting recently. We'll give a link to all that in this podcast notes below. But with that, Allison, I cannot wait to talk to you about benefit risk, which is a tough topic, right?
And thank you. I'm doing very well. And I appreciate being here and being invited to be on your podcast. I'm a longtime fan of yours.
You're so welcome. Now, Allison, you are a highly accomplished professional, a PhD in neuroscience from Stanford. Early career you spent in FDA as a reviewer and later on in multiple professional roles in different locations or different companies in leadership roles in regulatory affairs. But what I found the most interesting about your LinkedIn profile that you call yourself a lumberjill, right? So tell me a little bit about tell me the backstory on that. How did that come about?
Well, actually, it's perfect because I'm sitting in a cabin here in Idlewild, California, and I have taken up chopping wood. I don't know. It was like one of those things. My husband bought a chainsaw and he was cutting these giant rings of wood. And I was like, well, someone's got to break it down into more usable logs. And so I take those and it's the female version of a lumberjack and I just chop wood. And actually it's one of the videos that I will post hopefully in the next few weeks is me talking about some MedTech topics and chopping wood. So I'm trying to come up with some fun new ways of consuming industry information and education in this space.
Yeah, I think you are probably the only regulatory affairs professional I have come across who is interested in this activity, but amazing. That's awesome. So let's talk about benefit risk. One of the things I want to start by asking you is, let's set the stage right, because benefit risk is an important activity, not just for risk management, but it has a very strong relevance to regulatory approval or regulatory clearance. Tell us a little bit about how benefit risk is connected to this whole notion of safety and effectiveness.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think going back to just the topic of your podcast, right? And the company that you've created, we talk about risk. Let's talk about risk. And I think it's also, maybe we could title this one, Let's Talk Benefit, because I think oftentimes when we think of FDA and what they've been tasked to do is to protect and promote public health. And to do that, one of the biggest topics that we need to address is risk. What is the risk of the technology, of the pharmaceutical, of the biologic? And in the same breath, you're also supposed to be promoting public health. And so a lot of that is, let's talk about the benefit, right? And too often, I think FDA reviewers, and for good cause, they get really down in the trenches with thinking about the risk and forget to also titrate that with the benefit of these technologies, of the things that they're reviewing. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I think there's a lot of information out there of how do we report negative events or medical device reports, or how do we really understand the risks that patients are facing with these technologies? Or very rarely do we actually talk about, hey, here's all the great things that happened thanks to this either medical device or, I'm an asthmatic and I think about, gosh, I'd probably not be sitting here today if it hadn't been for the very well known combination product of an inhaler, right? Albuterol inhalers, that is a device and a drug and a combination product. Those things have saved lives, thousands of lives, right? And so we talk about the risks associated with that, but we can't forget about the benefit. And I think when we submit files to FDA and a lot of the conversations that I have with FDA, especially in light of like de novos, which you need to show that it's safe, that it's effective, and that the benefits outweigh the risks in order to get a favorable decision from FDA. Really, FDA's conversation is, okay, there are risks. There's risks to everything. I even tell people, I'm like, even tongue depressors have splinters, right? Like if you have those wooden tongue depressors, but there's
Yeah.
also a lot of benefit and we can't ignore that.
Yeah, this is so important because in my mind, this is where we have to differentiate the conversation about risk from the conversation about safety, because safety is relative to something else. Nothing is risk
Yes.
free and nothing is zero risk. And if we avoided risk, we will not be able to do anything or accomplish anything at all. So this whole notion of benefit risk is, I think, becomes difficult because there's no absolute standard or an absolute measure of how much more benefit is acceptable or desirable compared to the residual risk. So it's a judgment call. Now, from the FDA's perspective, obviously they pay a lot of attention to benefit risk in the pre-market phase. And I think that is where industry also does a lot of work in the design and development and testing and verification, validation, clinical testing, whatnot. But benefit risk is important in the post-market phase also, right?
Absolutely. I think that's one of the maybe misconceptions of some of these medical device developers. And I mostly am in the medical device space, so that's usually where I'll frame my perspective. But they often will see FDA clearance or approval or granting as the finish line. And I'm like, no, I think that's oftentimes the starting line, right? Because now you have a product, you're allowed to enter interstate commerce if it's an FDA decision. And you're now, as you register your facility and list your device and start making sales, that's when you're going to learn even more about your device. Hopefully, there's been enough information to make the decision, make a favorable decision to get you to market. But it's not just like, okay, here we go. Now we don't have to think about this anymore. And I think really making sure that companies are well versed in what their quality system is meant to do. And if there are any post-market controls or anything that they're supposed to do after they get that authorization letter from FDA, making sure that they're keeping up to date and doing what they said they were going to do. Document and do, right? Like make sure that you're actually fulfilling your obligations as a good player in the medical space.
And I think part of the reason why that is so in our industry is because 14971 is sort of the gold standard for risk management. And believe it or not, it wasn't until 2019 that they used the term benefit and defined it for the first time. So it's
the
not
idea
even,
of benefit is pretty new. It sounds like a new concept.
Right. But think about it. We can't really assess whether the risk is acceptable or not without looking at the benefits. And one of the things I want to clarify with you is we talk about benefits in many different ways. My understanding is that this is not the marketing gimmick or the advertisement and promotion type of a benefit statement, but something that is tangible and sort of provable with some data. Is that how FDA looks at it? Just to confirm my understanding with you.
Yes, I think that's one of the ways. I mean, I think making sure, your clinical data actually supports your indications. And for most de novos and almost all PMAs, right, you will need some form of clinical evidence to support that benefit risk and that safety and effectiveness requirement, really. So, and you're right, there's never been really a almost a benefit risk machine. Maybe that's what we need to work on together, Naveen, is like coming up with some sort of algorithm.
That's a good idea.
Of, there's so much data now that exists of what's been successful and what's been the patient impact, but there is no calculator, right?
No calculator.
Yes, there's 14971. There's different ways to assess risk. And I think FDA is looking more also now at, okay, what are the economics of this, right? Like how many people is this actually going to benefit? They don't care so much about the financial burden of it, right? Which some argue they should at the agency. But what is going to be the potential impact of this device? There's always going to be risk. I get so upset when companies were like, there's zero risk in my device. I'm like, nope, there's of course risk. And so you can try and reduce risk as much as, humanly possible, but also taking into account what are the patient preferences here? Oftentimes patients have different acceptable levels of what risk they're willing to take in order to get a specific treatment. So taking that into account and having FDA really listen to those data as well, right? Like I think that's extremely valuable, especially as you put together your narrative and your story as part of your pre-market submission. What are the things that FDA might not on first glance actually think about, but that it should be part of the benefit risk decision in that specific section of, let's say, your de novo. And there is a whole guidance document and a checklist that FDA has to try and reduce uncertainty around the benefit risk. And so I think that's the closest I've seen FDA getting to here's a way that we are evaluating it and what we hope that medical device manufacturer will go through prior to sending anything to us.
I'm so glad that you brought that up because to me, that is actually a pretty good way of doing it in the absence of any other kind of standard way of doing it. And we'll put the link to the benefit risk guidance from FDA in the show notes. But Allison, here's my concern. That guidance applies only to PMAs and Innovos for pre-market. No mention of 510Ks.
Mhm.
And we know that nearly 80%, I know roughly give and take, 80% of the devices go through the clearance pathway. And there is
Yes.
no requirement to even show anything about benefit risk. We assume that because it's substantially equivalent to something out there, it must be beneficial and the risk must be accepted. We assume. So to me, it sounds like there's a big gap there. And maybe that's why industry has not really embraced the idea of benefit risk, because everyone thinks we can get to market with 510K. Am I off base in kind of thinking like that right now?
No, you're not at all. I think there's a guidance document that's not widely used or well known, which is a benefit risk guidance for, I'm going to screw up the name, but we can put the link in, for evaluating substantial equivalence when there are differences in technological characteristics. Because the 510K program is really meant to be, you have the same intended use and you can have the same technological characteristics, but most of the time, most 510Ks have different technological characteristics. And sometimes those changes or those differences to your predicate device may actually have an increased risk, right? But there's also maybe an increased benefit, and the delta is such that FDA would say that would be an acceptable a device to have clearance. There's a great table or a figure in that guidance document that has it's like a 4-quadrant, looks like a Punnett square. And it's like, if you have increased risk and you have increased benefit, then we want you to help us understand why that deserves a clearance. Or if you have a decrease in benefit and an increase in risk, we're probably not going to say yes to that, right? It kind of goes through the 4 different potential scenarios and how you should try to justify it and provide those rationales to FDA to say, this is actually something that's worth it to give us clearance, and really using FDA's logic and their methods in order to make that case. Because that guidance document, it says it's for FDA reviewers and industry, right? So FDA is supposed to be using it as they make their decisions, but it's also really helpful for industry as we piece together our own benefit risk for a specific device. Like, how are we going to make this case to the agency to make it easy for them to say yes?
Yes, absolutely. I'll definitely want to check it out because even I was not aware of that. So thank you for letting me know, Allison. We should definitely talk about this. And what I have done is taken the pre-market FDA benefit risk guidance, and I actually reverse engineered that for an AI ML device that went through a 510K. And it was all public data. And I said, you could easily fill this worksheet that FDA has given you and make a pretty reasonable assessment. So I don't know why people are not using it. It'll be such an easy conversation, even in the post-market phase, to see if our risk has increased to a level that is really not tolerable anymore. So we'll definitely talk about those topics on Let's Talk Risk and produce more content. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about new technology, right? It is coming at us fast, and especially software and AI, ML. How do we begin to understand the benefit risk equation in this new technological environment?
No idea. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, I don't, but I suppose my recommendation is to really use historical precedent to try and figure out where we're going from here. AI/ML is extremely powerful, and there have been, medical devices have been regulated since 1976. Pretty sure none of us would want to be using some of the devices that were available in 1976, but that have iterated over the years through the 510K pathway. We've seen 510Ks that used a predicate that did not have any sort of AI, and then they themselves included some sort of algorithm or AI capabilities. So FDA is finding ways to implement these new technologies within the current pathways that are available to us. And I think really understanding the guidance documents around good machine learning practices, and FDA is really trying to do sort of like a global harmonization method to make sure that all the different regulatory bodies are looking at these in a similar way, at least, to really understand, okay, what are the questions that we need to make sure that things aren't, the device isn't hallucinating, or it's not going to
Mhm.
all of a sudden start machine learning something that is detrimental to a patient, right? So I think
Mhm.
understanding the guidance documents and really what FDA is saying here is what we expect of you if you want to have an AIML based device, and making sure that that's part of your plan as you're putting together your pre-market submission, but also understanding what is your responsibility and role post-market. And so we've had a
Mhm.
lot of companies coming to us saying, like, what about, can we put together a predetermined change control plan, right? Which is the
Mhm.
way that you can essentially have FDA understand the guardrails that you're going to put up and to make changes to your device without maybe submitting a new 510K, but not letting your device go outside those guardrails or making changes that may impact the indications for use or make a worse device, right? That's not what FDA wants. So I think there are ways that FDA is trying to keep up and also trying to be one of the leaders in the world to make sure that
Yeah.
we're having good devices and good products out there.
The good news is that we have now over 1,200 AI ML devices cleared or
Yes.
approved, right? We have a lot of information in the public space on de novos when they started, right? There are many de novos that have led to like 50 other 510Ks using AI ML. But in the de novo, my understanding is that there is a section on benefit risk. So I think people should look up how FDA reviewed benefit risk in the context of that de novo, what their expectations might be. Big picture, Allison, let's talk about some basic tips and tools for people. I think it has to start with a good understanding of the intended use and indication in the clinical use environment in which the device is going to be used. And that's, to me, common sense is the first place you have to start talking about the intended benefits and potential risks, right? Does it make sense to you?
Absolutely. I think there are, for better or worse, I mean, there's a lot of companies out there that are like, there's this problem and I'm gonna figure out a way to fix it. And then some folks will say, here's a really cool tool that we plan to use. But when they get through FDA, or as they, are going through and presenting to investors, they realize maybe no one's actually going to buy this, or it's going to have a really hard time with market adoption. So I think understanding your intended use, like what is the device intended to do, but also the indications. Who's this actually going to help? Is there a disease that's that actually would want to use this device? Because I think
Mhm,
if you're
mhm,
trying to make sure that you not only get to market, but that you actually get a lot of people to use it and benefit from your product, then you need to design that in early, right? And think about those things early. So I do
mhm.
think talking again, I think that's part of my brand of what Bluestocking Health is trying to do is like talk to more people. Like let's talk about it. Let's like have more conversations about what is the potential benefit, and I want to see companies make it. I don't want to see them get through FDA and then die on the vine or die in that valley of death, right? Or where they
Mhm,
say that
mhm.
there's difficulty with reimbursement. So how do we actually
Yeah.
set companies and then ultimately patients up for success?
Yeah, both ways. But this is where I think regulatory and quality professionals can play a big role because, generally speaking, I think my experience is that in the new product development environment, the voice of marketing, the voice of R&D is strong, and people have an idea about where they want to land. And nobody talks about what the intended use indication should be to get through the FDA, and it's only towards the end. So tell us a little bit more about how quality and regulatory professionals can play a bigger role, knowing fully well that there'll
Yeah.
be pushback. How can they take a leadership position in this area?
Yeah. I think bringing more people into the conversation, I realize a lot of companies are like, too many cooks in the kitchen, right? Can cause
Mhm, mhm,
issues. But I think you're spot on. Like bringing marketing into the conversation, bringing reimbursement voices in. Like, how are we actually going to get money? Because this is a business ultimately. Um, how are we going to make sure that we're designing to make it easier to get through FDA? I think there's oftentimes just tweaks to the design of the product or things that we can integrate into a clinical study that maybe the engineers hadn't thought about, but the regulatory person is like, hey, we need to incorporate this. It's going to make it so much easier once we are working with the regulatory bodies. So I think bringing those people into the conversation early is extremely valuable. It doesn't come without risks as well, right? As I said, if there's too many voices and too many opinions on how to do things, I think that's why a very strong leader, especially if you have like a good CEO or person that's really helping to manage all those parties, it can be extremely valuable. But I see the companies that leave one or more of those voices out of the conversation and say that's a future us problem, and it ends up really biting them in the end, right? And really being detrimental to the company.
Well, one of the things we are trying to do on Let's Talk Risk, Allison, is to really inspire and empower our colleagues and help them see their role much broader than just preparing a submission package or following up on a recall or doing post-market surveillance. We want to help them see their role as a strategic role because they are able to connect the dots. Only they are able to connect the dots, but they have to do a little bit more work and they have to build more relationships within the company. And they have to talk to a lot of people, build a sort of core group of people they can talk to. And we have had several conversations like that on Let's Talk Risk in the past. To me, it seems like a huge leadership opportunity for our QA RA colleagues in the industry. How can we motivate them to take this next step? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think understanding the mission of the company and really, I think for too long, quality folks at companies has been the police, right? Or considered the folks who are going to come in and want to do an internal audit on my team, and they're going to come up with findings, and that means I'm in trouble. Or regulatory, gosh, they're going to tell me all the things I can't do, or they're going to want me to change this about the device that I've been working so hard on. And I think if we could change that perspective and see it more as a, hey, everyone's got a role to play here. And at the end of the day, the mission is to get a device that's going to help people. And I think the voice of the patient should be in that conversation. One of the things that I was talking to a woman who worked at Medtronic the other day, and she said, one of the things that really helped the team, because as you said, there's so many different groups and different people that are involved in the development of these products. There's the clinical team, there's the post-market marketing, and they would all get together and there would be a patient that would come in, or, a parent of a child that would say, your device, like the thing that you guys worked on, that you helped get to market and helped get to my child, is the reason my kid is sitting here today. And it's one, or the reason I'm sitting here today. And I really think the voice of the patient and understanding at the end of the day, who is it that we all are trying to do this for, is the way that a lot of people can all of a sudden say, whoa, let's back up and let's appreciate each other here, because we all have a job to do. You're not trying to police me or make me, feel bad about what I've been doing. If I was talking to the quality department, if anything, you're trying to make sure that I every day continue to get better, that my quality, the whole point of the quality system is to not have a perfect, no findings quality system. It's to keep improving. So I often tell companies, I'm like, if you get a finding, or if someone said, or like, there's an great, what does that teach you? How do you learn from that? How do you get better? And how can you show up tomorrow thinking like, I'm really glad that as a team, as a company, we're actually better today than we were yesterday. I think it sounds kind of Pollyanna-ish, right? Like, oh, let's all just like get along and be better. But I think having the whole team, again, going back to the mission, having the team and having the company really say, what are we doing this for? And who is that patient at the end of the day that either will have a better quality of life or be alive today? I mean, isn't that something we can all work towards? Seems like it.
Yeah. No, you said so many amazing things in this conversation that I want to capture them for our audience. I think everyone who works in this industry has that passion for the patients. That's why we enter this industry, knowing that everyone else is equally committed to patient safety. I think us in QA RA can actually leverage that and really connect the dots, help connect the dots between the company's mission, our passion, our particular capability, and where we see the gaps in not saying, hey, not yes, no, not like this is regulatory, you will get regulatory approval or not, or it's compliant or not. We typically do yes, no, don't do that. Say, yeah, this may not work it like this, but there are 10 other options that we can offer, and be seen as problem solvers and offering solutions and not really as gatekeepers. So I do believe personally in my heart that now that technology is moving so fast, regulations are not even able to catch up. Our professionals in our business have a unique leadership opportunity. So I hope people will feel inspired by this conversation today. Allison, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about Bluestocking Health. It's a new initiative you have taken, but I want you to reflect on your career journey so far and help us understand where you are when you launched Bluestock, which was like just a few months ago, right? Very, very brand new.
Yeah.
What prompted you to do that? What's your vision? Where are you going? We want to hear all about that.
Yeah. There's so much. I started Bluestocking Health, and it was sort of a thought I had for many years in the back of my mind. I'm clearly an optimist. I like talking about things that are exciting, that are good. I like thinking about just what we were saying, like the things that I've worked on over the years have helped. And I think that is like the one thing that connects all of us, right? Yes, there are some bad players out there, I'm sure. But for the
Mhm,
most part, we really want to help people. We want to see people live a more full life. We want to have people around for longer, right? And
mhm,
so I really wanted to capture that. I think there's a lot of negativity oftentimes around the harms that may befall us. Again, we should absolutely always talk about risk. It has to be there. We have to understand the risks if we're going to decide for a specific treatment or diagnostic or therapy. I think the goal of what I wanted to do was to really amplify also the good, right? I think there's a
mhm,
lot of doom scrolling that people do right now, and I wanted to be maybe the anti-doom scroll of MedTech and say, like, let's talk
mhm,
about the cool stuff. Some of the videos that I've been coming out with are, here's just a cool device that I've learned about recently, and here's the clinical evidence that went into it. They did a lot of work.
mhm,
Here's the testing that had to go into it, and talking about helping people do some research, right? Because I'm in a very specific position to understand what went into some of these technologies, but also make it more digestible, make it fun, make it
mhm.
interesting, make it something that people want to share and talk about more. And I love being part of that conversation. I want people to look at the videos or look at certain things and be like, oh, that's so cool. And hey, you go to a dinner party a few nights later and you're like, I just learned about the wildest device, and like, here's
Yeah.
something that I want to share with other people. Because I think having that conversation and really spreading that conversation and talking about cool things like that is something that we can all get behind. So that's,
Mhm.
and the name, I don't, do you know Blue Stocking, the
Tell me,
reference? Okay.
talk about that. Yeah, how did you
So
come up with this name?
um, I actually, when I first was, my lawyer was like, well, you need a name for the company. And I said, well, it's kind of like a nerd. I'm such a nerd. And so I looked up synonyms for nerd in Google, and it came up with a list of things, and blue stocking was one of them. And I was like, I've never heard that term before. Tell me more. And I went down the rabbit hole, and it is a term from the 1700s
Mhm,
of a group of mostly women, but they also would invite men into these conversations. They'd meet in the salons and just talk about interesting, intellectually stimulating things that they wanted to talk about. Science,
mhm.
literature, poetry, art, anything that sort of was interesting to them. They would invite speakers, and they would say, don't wear your black stockings, your silk stockings, which were expensive. Just wear your blue stockings. And
Okay.
so it was a way for these people to just have these conversations and learn more and have it be fun and educational, entertaining. And so that's kind of how I landed on blue
That's
stocking
amazing. I
health.
love it. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. It's really so close to my heart in really lowering the bar
Thank you.
on conversations.
Yes.
How can we encourage people? And if I understand from you, you are trying to engage people in a conversation and get them excited about medical technology. That
Yeah.
seems to be your vision. Is that right? Or is there any other
100%.
long-term vision you have?
I mean, I guess my long-term vision is it's me and a few others. I have an amazing advisory board, but I guess in the future, I'd love it to be a source for people to say, hey, this is a personal experience. My dad was just diagnosed with something. I want to understand what tech is available for him out there. I want to
Mhm,
understand with this diagnosis, what are the devices that are available? Are there certain things that I should know? Should I know where to go look up any sort of recalls or issues that the device has had? What are his preferences of if he wants surgery? Does he want? So it's having those conversations with our loved ones, being able to understand where we get the information from, and maybe even having a website that's a landing page to say, hey, here's something that I'm dealing with. what tech is out there and how do I do that research. So it's really empowering patients and empowering
Mhm.
caregivers to really find information that might help them on their journey with MedTech, because there's a lot of drugs out there. And someone was telling me, you will always, when you go to a hospital or you go in to have any sort of checkup, there's a slight chance that you will interact with a pharmaceutical. You might get prescribed a drug, but there's 100% chance you will interact with a medical device, whether it's
Mhm.
a stethoscope or
Mhm.
a blood pressure cuff, or you're going to sit on one of the exam tables. Those are all medical devices. And so really understanding how they're regulated, understanding the benefits that they're bringing to you, and also, what are the risks? I think it only makes
Wonderful.
a patient a better person to receive care.
That's amazing. I love your mission. I really want to wish you
Thank you.
a lot of success with that. I'm a big fan of yours and will do all I can to get your word out. So, Allison, as we close, I want you to share with us as a closing comment, what would be your message to quality and regulatory professionals in the industry today?
Oh, this sounds so cheesy, but I guess just keep talking to each other. I think
Mhm.
one of the things that I found so impactful years ago, I was on a panel and it was talking about case for quality and the program that was really trying to change how we think about quality and change the conversation between regulatory quality to have it be less of a policing or a negative and more of a, hey, we're in this together. And the more that we actually help each other and make a strong case for quality, the better everyone is going to live in this company, right? Like, it helps the business side of things. You'll have a better product that you can sell. It's going to help the regulatory folks to make, not have as many recalls or not have as many things that they need to report to the FDA because there's not as many issues with the device. It's going to help the
Mhm.
quality system folks with inspecting or doing the internal audits, and really also any post-market things that they need to do. So I think if we can get more people talking with one another and understanding the role that everyone plays in this ecosystem,
Mhm.
it only benefits all of us.
Wonderful. What a perfect way to close this conversation. Allison, I want to thank you for coming to the show, taking the time to share your journey with us, your insights. I know we have a lot of insights packed into this conversation, and I love the mission that you have on Bluestocking. I really wish you all the success, and I can't wait to see your content just come out. And it's fun, guys. I'll be honest. It's fun. Go check out a couple of Allison's videos, and we'll post a link to Bluestocking Health right here in the show notes. So, Allison, thank you again. I wish you all the best.
Thank you.